Going live. You're live.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deborah Henderson. I'm former president of IRMAC, the Information Resource Management Association, and welcome to our June meeting. Our meetings are for continuing education of our members and the public about issues in information and data. And this month, we are talking about digital leadership and effective communication during quarantine. I want to welcome our speakers, Nicole Gerard and Laura Moon from Bear Slate, who are going to talk to us today about this topic. And as we are in this quarantine and lockdown for a number of weeks already, and the stay-at-home orders that apply both locally and in various countries, we're settling into a new way of working, and that working is virtual. As such, new and revised ways of working together have become a new normal. And if only during this time of quarantine, well, maybe not, maybe potentially ongoing into the foreseeable future. So in this presentation, we'll look at effective communication strategies, how and why you might need to re-board your teams now that you're working in an environment which is virtual, and all the processes around working together, and how to have a highly effective virtual meetings, and how to identify what type of meeting you're actually in. I've seen people set up Friday cocktail hour meetings in the new world. So Nicole has a background studying digital business models and ongoing study of social psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, mental health. And she is the co-host of Ask More, Get More show on YouTube. Please go and check that out. And she's a facilitator on these online webinars, courses, and workshops. Laura is accomplished sales and leadership executive, and she's also from Bear Slate. And she blends compassion and ambition in order to reach any goal with her audience. Having more than 2 decades leading coaching and training over 500 leaders and professionals. So welcome you folk from Bear Slate, and I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Deborah, and thank you to Nick in the background who is managing all of the IT wizardry. I am Nicole. This is my business partner and managing partner at Bear Slate, Laura.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And can you just confirm for me, Laura? You can see the screen. You're good.
I can see it. It's perfect.
Fine?
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you again to Deborah for having us. We're excited to be here. We're excited about what we do, and we hope you're excited about what you do as well. So today's discussion, as Deborah said, is going to be about successfully communicating with virtual teams. On the agenda today, we have 2 things. That's it. Tight agenda. 2 points. Re-onboarding and educating your team members to this new way of working, which of course is virtual or distributed. And then in general, how do you communicate with your teams? So our assumptions for this presentation, and we state these assumptions at the beginning because at the beginning of the pandemic, we actually worked quite a bit with organizations through the crisis management phase of everyone going to remote or distributed teams on a dime. And I mean like within a couple of days. So our assumption right now, as we sit in June, a few months in, that everyone has embraced some sort of version of remote work as a new business model. The other assumption, I need to make this clear, if you're in manufacturing, if you are in the service and restaurant or food business, if you are in an industry where you physically need to be present in order to offer your product or service, we get it. Working from home and distributed models applies to all other types of positions, mainly administrative. And in Canada, a good chunk of our workforce is actually administrative in nature. So our assumption, you've prioritized and started to coordinate this change across the entire organization, meaning everybody knows what's going on. You've allocated resources by now, both human resources and financial resources, towards sustaining the remote team model. And you're on the way to create new KPIs. So people have to understand what's expected of them. Very briefly about us. As I said at the top, we're excited about what we do. We love what we do, and we're going to tell you about what we do in 2 slides. So we at Bear Slate, we offer 2 main services. We are an approved training provider with the Ontario government under the Canada-Ontario Jobs Grant, part of the Highly Skilled Workforce Initiative. We recently got approved to provide our training digitally, because as we all know, we can't sit in a room together and do workshops together like we used to. So we do have everything available to train digitally, and there's funding available. I will repeat, there is funding available to train your teams. And we currently are training in time management for course creation, which is what we're about to talk about in this presentation. The other thing we offer is thought leadership podcast production. If you're a thought leader, we want to hear your thoughts. You want to put together some sort of content to network and to express your thought leadership. That's what we take care of. And what we like to say is, if you're an accountant, be an accountant. If you're a lawyer, be a lawyer. We will take care of the rest. Second, Laura and I do have the Ask More, Get More show, which Deborah talked about at the beginning, where we believe you are one conversation away from changing your life and getting more. So we'd like to talk to industry leaders and thought leaders and find out, how are they succeeding and how might we take something away and do that too. And we also have 2 podcasts that are out, the Ask More, Get More show podcast and Get More with Bear Slate. That's us. So we're going to talk about the big remote leadership secret. The secret is that remote work feels different because it is different. And that means you need to lead differently. It's interesting, a lot of the conversations we're seeing online about the difficulties of working from home and how it can be frustrating and time consuming and everything smushing together. Our personal life and professional life is melding together. Which is true, but we also have to remember that we're dealing with a pandemic on top of this change, which is not normal. Okay, so we always have to keep in mind that this extra piece of a global pandemic is not part of the normal transition to and work from home setup. So I'd like to show you one of my favorite slides in any presentation we've ever done. On the left, you're going to see the normal 3-phase process that we used to take clients through to move from a traditional, a traditional brick and mortar in-office team environment to the distributed team or work from home model. And what happened in March was the digital transformation happened because we had no choice. We didn't get to make a decision. We didn't get to talk about it and have 47 meetings in the committees and all the other decisions. Can we do it? Will it work? We're not sure. It happened. So we went from having time to move to having no time to move. And now we're talking about, well, how do we survive? How do we thrive? So the one question that we ask organizations that speak to us about learning how to communicate with and educate their teams remotely is, are you just looking to survive a short-term crisis, or are you driving the future of your business? I cannot stress the importance of asking and answering this question enough. Because you see there's a bit of a divide online, and Laura, you can chime in here, don't be afraid if you want to, but the conversations that we are seeing online on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on social feeds, in Zoom meetings, there are still organizations that feel that they're going to wait this out, cross their fingers, and go back to normal in a few weeks' time. And if only the government would just let us all go back to the office. The other group of organizations is actively working to put in place the training and education and communication pathways needed to succeed as the world looks today. So you need to decide what kind of business you're going to be.
Yeah, it's really important right now that you actually lay that foundation of what the future of your business is going to look like. Unless you are choosing to just sort of ride it out, which some organizations are. However, right now, the changes that you have the opportunity to make, given the environment that's presented itself, now is a great time that you can start to put some of those really solid processes in place and start to map the direction of where you're growing and how much of your remote team will remain remote and how much will go back and transition to a typical work environment. So investing in this question is very important.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of us are looking at, okay, what's our 6-month plan? Maybe even what's our 60-day plan for what we're going to do with the business. But until you answer this question, you aren't going to know what you need to map out for the next 30, 60, 90, 120 days. Because the way you go is going to determine the decisions you make right now. So as I mentioned before, this used to be the process that we would take people through. There was a discovery phase. We would transition individuals carefully and slowly and make sure they had all the equipment they needed, the training they needed, and then we would sustain it, which meant things like maintaining employee engagement, making sure people didn't feel cut off or isolated, even though they were working from home. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure everyone still feels like they are a part of the team, that they matter, that they are heard. But again, we sort of skipped a few steps and now everyone's at home. So what are we going to do next? So we are going to dive into the 2 points that we mentioned linked together. So re-onboarding, educating, and training your employees. Why do we need to talk about re-onboarding our employees? Well, if you think about when you bring on a new employee, they need to get oriented to the organization, the business, their teams, their leaders, their new role. Now that we've taken individuals out of their comfort zone and their way of working and asked them to go home and do the same job that they were doing before, they need to be reoriented to how that's going to happen. It's not the same thing as coming in and sitting at their desk and doing the same face-to-face meetings and following the habits that they've cultivated in their role to make sure that they're effective. They need to build new habits, but the organization needs to put that pathway in place for them to develop the new habits. So there's a lot of new going on right now, new schedules, processes, protocols, procedures, expectations, productivity levels, ways of working, and ways of communicating. Everything at the moment is new and it's applied to an quote unquote old role. So someone may have been in their position for the last 5-6 years, but now they have to learn a whole new way of doing it again. And let's not forget, on top of it, we're dealing with a pandemic. We have spouses at home, kids at home, multi-generations all living together. This is not this is not normal work from home transition. We need to leave room for all of the factors as they exist today. So, I just
want to touch on that for one quick second. One of the things that we've seen that organizations that are being really progressive right now and making very good change is they're actually simplifying a lot of these processes, because when you look at this slide, it can be incredibly overwhelming to think that you need new processes, that you need new schedules. But if you can take the simple steps and really refine what roles and responsibilities are per role and break it down starting there, then you will actually start to build a foundation of the new policies that will move forward. So when you look at this and you start thinking about the new processes and the new policies, the key is the communication and how you communicate it forward from this point, but also really looking at what is of excess, what don't we need, and what is the bare minimum that we need for our teams to perform, and document that and start small, because it can feel very overwhelming right now for individuals who do need to remap the future of where they're going and sort of unlearn their old practices. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because we've seen some really great organizations sort of step back and really simplify processes and start to write new ones off of what's needed today.
This is Deborah piping in here.
Yes.
I have seen organizations not do this at all. None of this.
Us too.
And it's simply, okay, take your laptop home and start working from there.
Yes.
And so no expectations, no productivity expectations. And I've heard stories of folks who just probably some mental health issues as well because of the COVID. Just can't get down to work. Is there a place in here specifically where we put coaching and checking in?
Yes. But Deborah, I do want to point out, and again, I think there's this misconception between people working in an office together and people working from home that here's the truth. If you're lazy about your leadership in person, you're lazy about your leadership if people are at home. There's no difference. If there are no processes and policies and clear expectations for outcomes in place, just because I'm sitting next to you at the office doesn't mean that that's better. The thing with remote work that I think a lot of leaders find frustrating is simply because being remote puts a big fat spotlight on the fact that you do not have clear expectations or policies or processes in place. Genuinely, that's what it comes down to. Because if people don't know what to do, right? If people don't know what to do, they're used to walking down the hall, knocking on the door. Hey, Laura, what do I do with this again? This has happened 3 times this week. I'm not sure what to do. Well, if I can't walk down the hall and ask Laura, or if Laura's on vacation, or if Laura retires, or Laura quits, all that goes with her. Where is it written down? Where is it shared? So that's actually a fundamental leadership and policy and process problem, not a location problem.
It just, as Nicole said, it really stands out at this point in time because you're so divided and you're in such isolation. To address the coaching question, absolutely, there should be some sort of support for individuals that do struggle right now. And we will see a lot of diversity in the individuals as well as the capability in individuals. So one of the things to remember as a leader, everyone is working at capacity, whether it's mental capacity, emotional capacity, intellectual capacity. We're all heavily saturated right now. And that's why I think it's really, really important that we step back and look at what needs to happen, how simple it can be implemented, and how we can communicate it with consistency across the team. So at the very least, if we start there and set small expectations, we'll slowly grow into it because our comfort level will shift also.
Yep.
This is Nick also piping in real quick to say, I think this is a really fascinating concept of the difference between the leaders who see it as an opportunity to take a step back and really outlook everything and say what needs to get done. And then the leadership that just says, we're going to throw duct tape at it. We're going to hope that it holds together until we can all go back to work and everything will be exactly the same as it used to be.
Yeah.
I think it's just absolutely fascinating.
Yes. And I appreciate that observation. I do want to say, though, it's my studies of therapy background piping in. The individuals that often really just want to hold on to the status quo and are praying that it will just go back to normal are actually trying to make those decisions based in fear. They're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of change. And unfortunately, the majority of corporate organizations that are larger actually incentivize you to not stray too far from the status quo. You are rewarded for doing what's always been done. Don't do anything crazy like change a process. So there is a reward system set up for maintaining the status quo. So what we do need to do, though, and there is an absolute opportunity, like you said, Nick, we can change things up because we've been forced to. It's a good time to say what's working and what isn't. But back to this, just like Laura mentioned, and what you see on the screen here, like any other change in the organization, you need to educate your teams. And again, you feel it, you know it, you sense it, you've worked for these organizations. The ones that keep you up to date and involved in what's going on do well. And the ones that simply roll out new processes, policies, procedures, changes, and don't say anything to anybody, we've been a part of those organizations as well, and they don't do so well. So the transition to working from home means educating your team about all of the new elements of the job. we cannot take a look at this transition as simply moving locations. If you've ever had to move your office from one building to another, that's a pain, right? You have to pack everything up. There's new hallways. There's new ways to communicate with each other. There's new ways of flow. This is not the same thing. We're talking new technology, new ways to communicate, new ways to engage with one another, new ways to motivate one another. It's very different. So you need to be aware of all of the new elements of the job, which means as leaders, we need to take action. What does that look like? We have 4 things you need to do. 4, 5, 4. The first thing you need to do is have a clear understanding of how each new element affects the organization and the team. It is shocking how many leaders actually don't know how the business does business, how clients come to them, how they are onboarded, who takes care of what step, which role takes care of which piece in the process. It is unbelievable that there is this lack of understanding how the business is actually done. And again, this is a great opportunity for us to take a look at how the business does business, look at our process flow, look at our maps and say, okay, this is how we can do it moving forward with people being distributed.
I'd
Laura
like to
looks like
say,
she's going to say something.
I am going to say something because in all fairness to business leaders, it is an incredibly challenging time right now.
True.
And
yes.
The majority of business leaders, having been in the role and understanding actually how much needs to be managed, this is when you really need to count on your team. This is when you need to
absolutely
not micromanage, but macro manage your team. Really pay attention to the overarching elements that live within your organization, and look to your team to provide this information to you if you are that leader. It's really hard as a leader that is responsible for so many things to know where to start. And the best place to go is to your team and ask them, because they will be able to communicate it with you. So it's changing times and we all need to adapt. So it's really important that we ask the questions we need to as leaders and not feel fearful of what we're going to get back.
Excellent point. Thank you, Laura. You're absolutely right. So even though we may not know the fine details, Laura makes an excellent point. Ask your team. Ask is what our entire message is. We believe in asking so that you will get the information, the insight, the clarity that you need. Once you've asked your team how everything functions for them, then, like Laura said before, simplify it. It's funny, we had a guest on our show. She's a counseling psychologist in organizational psychology, and she made the point that we often feel that in order to be professional or businesslike or thought to be intelligent, it needs to be complicated, where in fact it's harder to make something simple than it is to complicate the heck out of it. And I think a lot of us can think of a process or a policy that is so convoluted that it's difficult to explain, where it could be simplified. So right now there is an excellent opportunity to simplify what it is you're doing, how your people are working, and how the business is getting done, and then you write it down. So it's one thing for everyone to know it. It's another thing for you to show it. You need to write your processes down so there's something to point to, so that you don't have to be there to tell people what to do. They can just look it up on their own. Then you develop the education and training, which means you put all of your education and training in a central location that everybody has access to. So unlike working together in an office where I can just walk down the hall and knock on Laura's door and say, hey, Laura, I forget how we handled that other client. This one's the same. What did we do over there? You have to remember, you can't walk down the hall. You can't pick up the phone because our work lives are so hectic at the moment, mixed in with family and kids and trying to school the kids. This is unusual circumstances. Please give and empower your people to find the information they need when they need it, so they don't have to rely on coming to you for every tiny thing. So what that looks like, what you'll see here is actually an excerpt from the training that we offer under the Canada Jobs Grant. And the education is for onboarding new or existing team members. What does that look like? Well, you're going to do an introduction message from leadership. Yes, every single person, CEO or president, across the board. Your face needs to be seen. We need to hear the message coming from you because, again, we're not all together. We want to know about the organization. What's the new why? What's the new direction? What's the purpose? Has anything changed? Because again, we've seen some pretty incredible organizations switch their business model in order to stay relevant. It was who was the organization that switched to doing hand sanitizers again?
There's a few distilleries. There's one,
there was a bunch.
Dillon's, and there's
Dillon's, that's the one.
We've seen a lot of organizations shift to
so maybe you've changed.
Yeah.
Right? You want to be able to capture your new why, your new reason, your new what am I doing moving forward. You want to introduce your individuals to the department. What does that look like now? The team, who is doing what, and then their role. So you can see here, can you see my pointer as I'm going across the screen?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. What is the function of your role? Why is the role important? How does it fit into the larger picture? All of this is created as a digital course. So your employees can go in, rewatch, re-listen, relearn, revisit the information whenever they need to. Can you imagine if you had a new employee that was learning your CRM, and instead of having them sit with you for 3 weeks next to you, shadowing as you click and push and put all the information in, if they went away and watched tutorial videos on how to use your system, and anytime they had a question, they just referenced that video, how much faster would they onboard? How much more time would you as a leader or a trainer have to do your work? And then really do deep training with them on more important matters. So this is what Laura and I and the team at Bear Slate do. We help organizations do this so that they can be more clear and effective with their remote teams. If you want to be able to lead your remote team effectively, you need to take yourself out of the process as quickly as possible. Again, I liken this to walking down the hall and knocking on a door. We can't do that anymore. So the alternative is an influx of emails, text messages, WhatsApp, Zoom meetings, etc. If you find your staff is coming to you for absolutely everything, then you need to look at your training. You either need to put it in place or you need to tweak it. Anytime you find yourself pulled down into the weeds, as we all like to say, you need to pull yourself up out of it. So that brings us to communication. Do we have any questions at all about digital training and why it's important for remote teams? I'll just ask Nick and Deborah if any questions have come in before I go to the second part for communication.
No questions yet. Although I was curious on my own part. You were mentioning that management from the top down needs to be seen. Does that mean like just a video of the CEO sitting and like being like, my name's John CEO and I'm here to welcome you to the family? Or like
at minimum
legitimate communication?
Yes. Both.
Preferably legitimate, but I mean, at the very least, a hello and welcome to the organization and why we exist.
Absolutely.
I think the biggest message to take away from this is anyone who has gone through any kind of change management training right now is when they need to put that into practice. So we learned that through change management, when we have to shift in a culture in an organization, the responsibility starts with the leaders. And we'll move into how communication affects, or the type of communication and how you choose to communicate will affect your success or failure. But I think, Nick, I mean, everyone who works somewhere wants to see who's leading them, and they want to know and feel that they understand why they're willing to work for that individual. So we strongly recommend that it is the senior leaders, the owners, anyone who we can get on video, that they get on video and they talk about their mission and their why to the organization itself, because it builds so much value and it builds trust within the culture of the company.
Mm-hmm. The other thing too, you have to remember that when a leader is speaking to the team or to the organization, It's very easy for tone and context and the way we use our words to get misconstrued if it's in an announcement or if it's another
text or an
newsletter.
email.
Yeah. Now we have the tools available. It's so powerful for you to look at the camera and say, welcome to, I'll use us, Bear Slate. We exist because X, Y, and Z. We are so excited to have you here because we're excited about what we do. We are going to make a change. We are going to impact people. And you can bring that emotion to it. You're more likely to connect and resonate with the mission and vision and values of an organization when you hear them spoken by someone that's passionate about them. It means more than the booklet and the flags on the wall that we used to have. Deborah, were you going to ask a question?
Yeah. So maybe I'm reading ahead here, as I can see from your new title slide, but I'm really interested in what you touched on in the last slide, which is around, if you're in the technical, then get yourself out of it.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things that I assume you need to do is to tell people what platform to use for what type of communication they need, whether it be email, Zoom, Skype for Business, and so on and so forth. And they need training on that.
Absolutely. 100%.
So yes, no, and that's great because it's exactly where we're going next. So let's jump into that.
1 second before we jump into that, we actually do now have a question.
Sure.
How do employees tell if their manager is actually being effective on managing work from home? Is there any easy way to tell?
How can employees tell if a manager is being effective?
Yes.
So I would. It's funny because I would redirect that and say, based on your own performance, how engaged is the manager that you're working with, and how engaged are you with that manager? That would be, to me, the type of question as an employee. If you are effectively and actively communicating up, which we talk a lot about, then you will have a clear idea whether or not your manager is engaged and active.
They've added on an additional little caveat to their question, which is also, it's how can they tell if they're being if how they're being managed is okay or not, and maybe even how to communicate this lack of being able to, the lacking of the management ability.
Right. So that, if you want.
Okay, our first answer, the top of it is always going to be ask.
Yes.
Have the conversation, right? But the second piece to that, and I know Laura will be able to speak passionately about this, but we often build up a conversation in our head and think it's going to be difficult. We put fear into it, we project and have this whole full conversation on both sides, and then decide that the risk of asking or having that conversation that seems difficult isn't worth it. And we also build up in our heads, well, I can't talk to my manager and say, Laura, I have no idea what you expect of me. I don't know what I'm supposed to be working on today because it changes every day. I need some help. I need you to tell me what's expected of me, because we think we should already know.
Right. I think it's really, really important that we ask for what we need. As employees, the responsibility really does fall on the individual to say, here's my role, here's what I'm filling, here's what I think I should be working on. Can you guide me in the direction that you feel I need to move in order to be performing? And by simply asking a question like that, you then put the responsibility onto the manager to take action. And the best strategy when you are looking for feedback, because it sounds like to me that you're in a role where you feel like you need at least recognition, feedback, support, guidance, direction for growth. The best thing that you can do at that point is make recommendations for your role moving forward, and ask whether or not the performance of what you have been providing meets the standard of what's being expected at this time. There's no problem in asking for clarity.
It's like taking a stake in your own work.
Yes.
Yes. It's the accountability piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
The second that an individual takes responsibility for their own role, they then force others around them to take equal responsibility for theirs.
It's by example or through osmosis.
Thank you so
All
much.
right,
That was a
so-
wonderful answer.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
All right, so
Okay.
effective communication. We actually have to pause and think about this for a second, because there seems to be there's the thought that the way we're communicating at the moment is effective. However, what we're actually doing is pulling face-to-face and in-office communication and trying to replicate it online, and it's not effective at all. So let's take a look at that. Are you actually communicating effectively? And as we go through this, I want you to think about your own work day. Think about today. What happened today? Did any of these come up? Do any of these sound familiar? Too many meetings scheduled with no agenda, no purpose, no clear outcomes, and no accountability. Most meetings veer off into topics that have nothing to do with the reason for getting together. I know every single person here can think of an example when this happened in the office. Is it happening now that you're remote? Since starting to work remote, and I think, Deborah, this is going to hit the nail right on the head with your question. Teams are communicating with text message, FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, Google Hangouts, WhatsApp, Slack, email, Discord, and their phone. Communication is absolutely everywhere and anywhere people can possibly put a message in voice, text, or video. It's all over the place. Team members, and this is going to touch on what we talked about in the first half, have to be retrained and educated over and over again on the same topic. So the technology that you're using, the new processes you have in place, new expectations that might be in place. And if you as a leader are not available 24/7 to respond to the team, nothing happens. And I won't name names, but I have at least 3 friends that are in director positions or higher that take calls on the weekend, in the evening, on vacation. They've gotten used to being available all the time, which means the process of putting together the education needed to prevent that hasn't been put in place. And I'm sure there are many of us here that think, well, if I don't answer the email, the team won't know what to do. If I don't pick up the phone or get on that Zoom call, they're not going to know how to handle that client. And that's how we get into that false sense of the world's going to collapse if I'm not on 24/7. And then we end up burning out. We get sick, we get stressed, we get health problems. This is because we're not setting boundaries. The truth. Are we all ready for the truth? The key to effective communication with your remote team lies within the training you provide or don't provide. If everyone here is good with having 10 Zoom meetings a day, which I read an article, someone was having 10 Zoom meetings a day. If you're good with that, great. But I'm telling you, the people around you are not good with that. It's too much. So the truth about good communication, it's having clear expectations for your meetings and sticking to them. It means you have new policies for where, when, and how you communicate with the team. Because again, if you think about being in the office, is there a policy about walking down the hall and knocking on someone's door and interrupting them for the 3rd time today? No. It might be frowned upon, or you might be thought of as a little bit rude if you keep interrupting, but there's no policy on where to communicate or when or how. It's time that we moved away from crisis management communication towards new and sustainable ways of communicating. The reason why we've used the phrase crisis management communication is because back in March, when we were first talking to companies about this transition, it genuinely was crisis management. We didn't know what the virus was. We didn't know the effect it was going to have. We didn't know businesses would be closing for as long as they have and continue to be. It was crisis management. Now we are 5 months in. This isn't crisis management anymore, which means we can't continue to communicate like it is, which means we're not having 5 and 6 Zoom meetings a day. Our emails are not blowing up. Everybody isn't doing everything. We need to get organized again because this is the new normal. And if you remember, if you recall at the very beginning of the presentation, we asked you the question, are you looking to survive and cross your fingers and hold your breath and wait for things to go back to normal? Or Is this the new normal? And you're going to build your business moving forward on this new normal. So I want to give you a few examples of some of the thought leaders we've spoken to that illustrate the way that remote work communication is actually different. The very first one is Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and he was on our show. He's an organizational psychologist. He said something so brilliant, and it's something that Laura is actually an expert at, which is simplification. He said that complexity kills motivation. The more streamlined and clear a role is, the more likely you are to succeed, which means, as Laura mentioned, communicating to your team remotely needs to be clear and concise. Your new processes and ways of working need to be clear and concise. It needs to be as simple as possible, as few steps as possible. That way you're more likely to be successful. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Laura.
no, he really does also speak to having very specific key roles in individuals in the organization. So instead of having someone in a role that's multitasking several different activities, try and simplify the role as much as possible so that it's similar tasks that align with each other. And that makes that role fulfillment so much easier from a distance, because we have to remember, we have to shift the way that we're thinking about managing, because we are still managing at a distance. So when we can provide the clarity and we can provide the simplicity of the role, and we have a clear understanding of what the expectations are, it's much easier to manage. It's also much easier as an employee to fulfill the job. So
I know what's expected.
Yeah, when we talk about crisis management, absolutely. In the beginning, we said, you know what, just get on Zoom, get comfortable being seen, have a conversation. But we now have to shift the mindset, and we have to think about how can we be productive, how can we be financially responsible, and how can we provide direction that's clear.
Yes. So to expand on what Laura just said, your team needs, especially right now, they need clear and concise direction for what they're working on each day. And they have to understand what success looks like at all levels. What does that mean? I, as the employee, need to understand what success looks like for my boss, for my manager, for my colleagues. Am I pulling my weight as a team member? As long as I know what is expected of me, I can fulfill it. If there's any ambiguity, or as I mentioned at the bottom here, hint, hint, this does not change regularly, because there is so much change happening right now, genuinely on a day-to-day basis. Taxes, work from home, not work from home, viruses, not like our global change is happening and moving by the hour. In the organization, my accountability for success and what I'm supposed to be working on should not change daily. I have a role to fulfill. I know what's expected of me. I will make sure it gets done in the time frame given to get it done. As an organization, that should be your focus. It's no longer, were you here at 9? Did you check out at 5? Were you here for the 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? Did you get permission to go to the dentist? Are you sure you have to take your kid to the doctor? Once we're clear on the outcomes, we don't have to micromanage time anymore, which is wonderful, especially when people are remote. Do you know how much time it saves you as a leader to not have to babysit because you're treating your employees as adults and set the expectation, and then they know what to do? You as a leader save so much time. So another guest of ours, Jonathan Carter, he owns Kata Accounting Solutions, an accounting firm that specializes working with organizations. They are a 100% remote, cloud-based accounting firm. Because they had their processes and policies put in place, because they knew where, when, and how to communicate, when the pandemic hit, there was not a single bump, not a blip. Everyone knew what they had to do. They knew what they were accountable for. They didn't have to pile on synchronous communication, meaning a Zoom meeting for hours every single day to figure out what's happening. They simply kept working because it was clear what the expectations were. And In Jonathan's firm, they have training digitally. The information is available. They know where to go. They know how to find it. They know who to ask when it's time to ask. And they're able to do deep work and be independent, which again brings us back to productivity is not about the number of hours you clock in and clock out. It's the output. So because we're working remote, that should be even more important. It doesn't matter how many hours you spent or if you worked for 3 a.m, helped your kids all day and 2 p.m. Your work got done. That's all we want as a business. We want the output. So that's what our focus needs to be on. The other thing here too is understanding the type of information that you have to share. So Deborah, you alluded to this earlier with your question. You want to understand what kind of information you're sharing. So again, we're seeing meetings. We saw this in offices. Meetings in general are used to communicate, and they're a terrible way to communicate with each other. They're not productive. So we don't want to try and pull that over to remote work either. Understand the kind of information you're having. Do you need to have a 30-minute Zoom meeting to provide a 10-minute update on a project? No, you don't. I'll challenge that. Another individual that was on the show, Emily Melius, she told us to right-size our expectations for this exceptional time. And again, I cannot stress enough that as anxious as we all are to get back to working, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. We still have children at home. The summer is here. There's no one to educate them, or now we have to watch them, of course, as parents. There's multi-generations living in the same house. People may still not have access to devices to do their work. You might have a mom, a dad, and 2 kids that all need the family computer, and they haven't been able to get extra devices yet. We need to treat each employee individually and figure out how they can contribute. Because if they're contributing, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, a lot of the work that can be done when you look at a job description or a role that you have in the organization, a lot of the work can be done independent and remote. And when it can be done, have it be done that way, obviously. But take a look at other roles in the organization and see whether or not that individual can actually fit into some of the roles and responsibilities that someone else isn't necessarily filling. Now's the time to sort of shift what those jobs look like so that you can accommodate. And I think one of the things that is really true about this, and going back to technology and communication, we have seen so many organizations where employees or managers will adapt because one employee doesn't know how to use a certain software. And so they'll have like multiple softwares that they use. They'll have Slack, they'll have Google Hangouts, they'll have, pick one and get everybody trained on one. It will save you so much in the long run. I just wanted to make sure that we talked about that because there's so many things out there. Just pick one.
Yes. And here's the thing, just because it's available doesn't mean you have to use it. I mean, this is one of the things that we actually do with clients in phase 1. Well, what we used to do pre-pandemic.
Discovery.
In phase 1, what is your business model? How does business get done? Now that you know what you need, then you go look for the tool that meets that need. What's happening is we see the reverse. Oh, there's Zoom. Oh, there's Hangouts. Oh, there's Skype. Oh, there's Slack. Let's use all of it.
Yeah.
You need to know what you need and find the tool that fits. Now, just we're almost at the end, guys. We're almost at the end. One small point about mental health checks. Mental health checks are necessary. They are good to do, but they shouldn't overtake regular meeting objectives. This is another example of, in the beginning of crisis management and communication, it was important as a team to be together and talk about what is going on because it was an incredibly challenging time for everybody. But now that we have more stability in what is happening, we know what's kind of going on, these mental health checks need to happen individually. That privacy needs to come back in. I don't need to talk about Laura and her kids and if she's going to see her in-laws in the middle of a project management meeting. We don't need to do that. It's okay. Now, is there a place for that kind of information? Yes, in that kind of meeting. So Deborah said at the top, there are cocktail hours happening where you can socialize and talk to each other. Good example of this, Stuart Quinn, who is the leasing manager for the Calendar Club of Canada, which is the fun store in the mall when we used to be able to go to the mall. For his team, they're now all remote. He was a physical product business, but now they are remote except for the warehouse, and all the measures are in place. When they have their weekly update meeting, they plan for a 5-minute win at the end of every meeting, which means Deborah did this cool thing today. Laura finally figured out how to mute herself on Zoom. Woohoo! Whatever that is, a small win. I went for a walk today. I left the house. Wonderful. Small wins, but they're planned so that it's not coming in for a project management update on your new product release that is happening in 6 hours and all of a sudden 2 of the hours are spent talking about personal stuff. Plan it in and you can address it. Quick reminders and housekeeping updates should be put in group messaging boards or a forum for everyone to find when they have time. Here is a tip, a pro tip when it comes to remote work communication. The more asynchronous, the better. Let people do work. Have a place, a portal, a forum where people can go and get their updates. I do not want to stop what I'm working on to come and sit in a Zoom meeting to talk about some administrative updates that I could have read on a forum. That's a better use of time. So the last thing we're going to talk about, because it's so important with communication. And again, people seem to think that more meetings equals more communicating. It's not true. Meetings that go over an hour should be the absolute exception. However, they're the standard. They were happening as standard when we were in person in offices, and they're happening now. You see the information and complaints of Zoom overwhelm and Zoom burnout that's happening all over LinkedIn, all over Google. Articles are being written ad nauseum about it because, again, leaders have misunderstood communication and meetings. Talking does not equal communication. So please do not make people sit in front of a Zoom screen 4, 5, 6 times a day for 60 minutes or more. Most of your meetings should be between 15 and 30 minutes because all your meetings have an agenda. And when you have an agenda, you have a clear, concise goal. You know why you're getting together, you know what you're going to get done, and you don't need an hour because it's quick. You understand what you're there to do and you do it. It's clear as to why every person is in the meeting. So if we all think back to prior to this, and I know certainly in my 2 decades in a corporate environment, all of the FYIs and you're invited, if you can come if you want, please do not invite people to a meeting that they aren't mandatory to be there. What is mandatory? You need them to make a decision. You need their input on something. It's absolutely crucial that they're there. If not, please don't make them come. Before you're setting up a meeting, ask yourself, is there a better, faster, more efficient way to do this that does not involve having a meeting? It's interesting. I saw a quote from Jeff Bezos a couple of years ago and it made me laugh, and it's pretty true. He said, if you can't feed a room, like this was back in the office when we had office meetings, if you need more than 2 pizzas at a meeting, it's too many people. Also, this is the thing with meetings. I mean, we've written an entire course on meetings. Meetings take up too much of our time and they don't allow your employees to do deep work. So please remember, as you go back to the office tomorrow, really take a look at your schedule for your meetings.
I want to add to that too, Nicole. One of the things that we see missed, I mean, most people now do have an agenda. The problem is not very many people assign a time person and allocate the time to that agenda. So for example, if there's 5 topics that are going to be discussed, each topic gets 10 minutes and you stay true to those 10 minutes and you have someone responsible for that. If at the very least, if you have to have that 1-hour meeting, make sure that every minute is spoken for, because every minute that you sit on a meeting is money you're spending. And I want to make sure that you're spending it well. So make sure that someone is paying attention to those minutes. Time is the most valuable commodity right now. And we waste so much in meetings because no one is paying attention to the time. and then the time is up and everyone has to go. And a lot of the time, we don't actually get to what we need to. So very, very important that there's someone who's regulating the time, who is holding people accountable to the time, and really assigning responsibilities from those meetings. So meetings can be great when they are facilitated well. So it's a
and they're done with intention. And Laura, you actually just reminded me, there was another quote from Jeff Bezos that I completely forgot until you just reminded me. If you are not willing to go into your wallet and pull out the hourly rate for somebody to have them attend a meeting, you're like, ooh, it's not worth it, then you shouldn't be inviting them.
Right.
That's another way to gauge it. Would you pay this? And you are, when you ask people to come to your meeting, you're still paying their salary. If you're not willing to pay double to have them show up, then they're not needed there. So today's takeaway, make sure you understand how the business does business. And as Laura said, talk to your people, ask questions, find out how things flow so that you can build the training and education around it so they can be independent. Because education and training is vital for remote teams to be self-sufficient and productive. Effective communication starts with intentional education and training. You need to do it with intention. We can't do the shadow for 3 months and go talk to Sally and there's Bob, and we can't do that with remote teams. You have to be intentional about it. And then finally, you must understand where and why you are communicating, the type of message that you're communicating, and the medium that you're using. I encourage you all to go back to work tomorrow and see if you can get through the next 10 days of no meetings. What would happen? Everybody just got a little bit scared. So above all else, remember, you've got this. This is new. Let's be brave and be bad at something new for a little while until we can get good at it. Mm-hmm. This is us. If you would like to reach out to us, of course, we're here as a resource. Happy to answer questions. Happy to talk to anybody. Deborah and Nick, if there are any other questions, we're happy to answer them. And if any come in after, we can answer them after as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole and Laura, for talking with us today about the very, very important shift that we've all had to accommodate in our lives somehow in the last 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. Are there any questions from the floor, Nick?
At the moment, no, but I'm going to put it out there. Please, anyone, put questions if you got them. These are very smart people who made a lot of interesting, fascinating points.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Oh, speaking
of, I do have one question.
Yeah, sure.
Over the last few months, the rules have been changing for us with businesses. First of all, you'd open the beginning of May, maybe the beginning of June, there's a phase 1 to phase 3. Wear masks, don't wear masks, worry about fresh air, and so forth. All of these things impact business as well, and how we do business, as well as us personally. It's got to a point where the federal government has said, well, it is so complex, and every area is different. Do what's best for yourself within the general guidelines. So, how should businesses be communicating in this maelstrom of different messaging going on? Should they have a particular channel for COVID with their employees?
Actually, so Deborah, I think that's a really good question. I think it's one a lot of people are asking, but I actually think there's a better question. The better question to ask is, are we rushing back to a business model that isn't as effective as one we could use moving forward? So the question is, if I have a fully administrative type of office, I'm in an office for one thing, do I really need everyone in the same building sitting next to each other? Is that effective? Do I need to pay the insurance and the lease for the building and the cleaning and the lights and everything? Do I need that? And if the answer is no, and if you've had some kind of success over the last 5 months with everyone at home, keep going.
I think there is something to having open communication in a channel that is very specific to what's happening daily
Sure.
in an organization. I know that we have a guest on our show who is a lawyer who attempts to answer questions as things come flying at them. And there is a lot of different information out there. So yes, I mean, having some sort of information page, whether it's a shared file where documents are shared and dropped for everyone to access, some place where you are consistently communicating what you learn and anything that influences the direction of the business, because a lot of businesses today really don't know where, especially if we're located in downtown Toronto. We're going to be one of the last to open up. And again, it's that question that you step back and say, okay, what can I do? How can I continue to grow? How can I continue to build the business and the model of the business? And how am I communicating with the company overall? Because organizations that have had to lay off entire teams, you still want to communicate with those employees and keep them informed. So absolutely, I'm going to say, if you are a business owner and because of all of the changes that are coming, make sure you are communicating, but pick one platform to do it in. So whether it is a Facebook community or a Slack channel or a simple shared Google file drive, make sure that everyone in the organization knows they have access to it, and updates will be posted there. I think it's really important that business owners take the responsibility of communicating and continuing to communicate with their teams, whether they've been laid off or not, and rely on the government websites. The information that's out, the most accurate information that's out, is the government websites. Don't pick up information. I mean, I've heard from you, fake news, all of these misleading articles. Go to the original site of where the information is being provided from, and draw on that information, or seek legal advice if you're looking to make an announcement in the company.
But Deborah, I think it's the two things. It's, yes, you should be communicating, of course, in one spot. And two, if this pandemic was not happening right now, are you genuinely going to have everyone come back into one building, or can you continue to build and grow and strengthen with people at home?
Without being there.
Yeah.
I hope that helped.
I think that's a fascinating answer to that question. I think it also harkens back to like really earlier on when we were talking about the managers who are going to look at this as a way to try and change the processes and simplify things, and the ones who are just going to say, let's just power forward until we can revert back to whatever. Now, there's another question online, which is from someone who's asking, how do we distinguish what is a meeting in these times?
Well, what I like to say is there a point? So if the point is to simply get together and everyone has their, water or wine glass and we're here to socialize, I get why I'm here. If the point is because Laura and Deborah and Nick and I need to sit down and make a decision in order to go to phase 2 of some sort of process or project, that's the point of the meeting. There needs to be a point. And I know it sounds a little flippant to say, and it's kind of humorous, but your agenda is the point of getting together. It's why I'm giving up. It's that opportunity cost. I'm giving up time over here of working on and being productive in some way on my schedule to come and sit for 15 to 30 minutes with my colleagues. Is my time being spent well? If there's no point, then I should be over here working and producing.
Yeah. So anytime that there's an accountability or a responsibility that needs to be accepted or changed, that's when a meeting should be held. When there's something of critical information that everyone needs to know and be involved in to take responsibility. Otherwise, it can be something that can be communicated.
Yeah, we didn't dive into it just because we didn't have enough time, but we actually do believe that there are different kinds of meetings. So there are the socializing meetings, fine. There's decision-making meetings where the decision makers need to be present to make said decisions. There are brainstorming meetings. I mean, you have to understand what kind of meeting you're coming to. And like Laura said, there's accountability on you as the individual to say no if it isn't clear why you should be giving up your time over here being productive to come and sit in a meeting.
In the nicest way possible.
Of course, professionally, of course. It's okay. Here's the thing. It's okay to ask.
Yes.
What am I supposed to do here? Am I supposed to bring anything? Do I have to prepare? What am I expected to do afterwards? It's okay to ask.
Yes.
Why I'm coming.
Well, thanks very much, everyone, for attending this session. And we've gone over a little time.
Yes.
So thanks for your patience and attention, and great meeting. Go look at bearslate.ca and their YouTube channel. They're great guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you